Private defense is a defense available for the tort. We have already discussed certain defenses in the previous lecture. In this particular lecture, we will discuss the defense which is called as a private defense. By taking this particular defense, defendant can avoid his liability under a tort. So what exactly the private defense is there and in what circumstances the defendant is entitled to take this particular defense that is supposed to be known as a private defense. So law permits use of reasonable force to protect one's person or property. So definitely a law permits each and every person to use a reasonable force for the purpose of protecting his property as well as for protecting his body. So while protecting his property, while protecting his body, if any person, if a defendant cause any kind of damage or loss to the plaintiff, then plaintiff cannot file a suit against the defendant. And if the plaintiff filed a suit against the defendant, defendant will be entitled to take the defense that is known as a private defense. Why? Because he was protecting his property, he was protecting his body, and in that particular process plaintiff sustained a loss. That's why defense of private defense will be available for the defendant. In criminal law also, in the Indian Penal Code, the separate chapter is there, section 96 to section 106, which deals with the concept of right of private defense. It means for protecting the body, for protecting the property, the person is entitled to apply a reasonable force, and in that particular process he can cause an injury to some person. Even if there is a threat of death, if there is a danger of death, then such person will be entitled to apply a force against the other person up to causing his death also. So this is a particular defense which is discussed under Indian Penal Code, but in law of tort also the person can use a reasonable force for protecting his body and property. If the person uses the force which is unnecessary for self-defense, suppose what law permits a reasonable force for the purpose of protecting his body and property. But suppose if a person uses an unnecessary force, extraordinary force, unreasonable force, then under such circumstances person will not be entitled to take the defense that is known as a private defense. So for protecting the property, for protecting the body, if the person uses an unreasonable force, unproportionate force, then definitely this defense will not be available for the defendant. When person will be entitled to take the defense? If he uses a reasonable force, whatever it may be the danger to the property, according to the danger to the property he can use a force. Suppose if the little bit danger to the property is there, he can use a little bit force. If the highest danger is there, he can use the highest force. In proportionate, he can use a force for the purpose of protecting his property and body. If he uses unreasonable force, unnecessary force, he will not be entitled to take the defense that is known as a private defense. Case Ramanuj versus M. Gangan. In this particular case, the defendant sprayed an electric wire in his field for the purpose of protecting his crop from the trespasser, from the wild animals. So he sprayed a live electric wire, and what was the intention of spreading the live electric wire? To save his crop from the wild animals which may enter into the premises and which may cause any kind of loss to the crop. But unfortunately, plaintiff tried to enter into the premises of the defendant, and due to that particular live electric wire, he was electrocuted and sustained an injury. So plaintiff filed a suit against the defendant. Defendant take the defense of private defense. Why plaintiff filed a suit? Because plaintiff sustained an injury due to the act of the defendant, and now plaintiff filed a suit against the defendant, and defendant's contention was that he was protecting his property from the trespasser. So in this particular case, court says that whatever the force applied by the defendant, that particular force was unreasonable. That particular force was unreasonable because laying down or spreading a live electric wire is an unreasonable force. And that's why court says that private defense is not available for the defendant and held liable to the defendant. When person will be entitled to take the defense? If he use a reasonable force for protecting his property. So what the defendant can do for protecting his property? What defendant can do? Definitely one can protect his property by fixing a broken piece of glass on the wall, on the compound wall. We used to see that some person are fixing a broken piece of glass on the compound wall, and the very intention of fixing that particular glass is to protect their premises from the trespasser, and that is a reasonable one. One can do so. But if a person use unreasonable force, then definitely private defense will not be available for the defendant. So this is a particular defense by taking which a person can apply, person can avoid his liability. But when person will be entitled to take the benefit of private defense? If he use a reasonable force. What exactly the reasonable force is there? Whatever the danger to the property is, that in proportionate person can use a force. If a person use excessive force for protecting his property, the defense is not available for the defendant. I hope you understand this topic. If you understand this topic, please subscribe my channel, hit the notification button, hit the like button and share this video with your friends. Thank you. Thank you very much.